I'm on a quest to beat and rate every single PlayStation 2 RPG, TRPG, action RPG, and everything in between. I'll also be giving each game an overall rating and comparing it to the other completed titles. If you want to see my full playthrough, check out my second channel, Low Cloudane Gameplay. Now let's get started.
Low Cloudane.
Take a second to look around. Much of what you see is thanks to one important invention. An invention that is rumored to have gotten us into space, that laid a foundation for many civilizations, and that brought about advancements that improved our lives for decades. And today, it's practically useless. Say hello to the abacus, a calculator used by ancient merchants and scientists to manage complex numerical calculations. With the advent of computers in the calculator, the abacus became all but worthless. This is how I feel about games like Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance and Champions of Norrath on the PS2. Like the abacus, these games were pretty cutting edge and, dare I say, fun when they were released. A top-down hack and slash that you can play with friends will always be entertaining. But going back to these titles today, you realize with the advent of games like Diablo 3 and 4, Divinity Original Sin, Dragon Age Origins, and Pillars of Eternity, we've all but made games like Champions of Norrath worthless. Sure, they're fun to mess around with, but advancements in the top-down action genre have improved exponentially over the past few years. Today, I'm going to try and parse out the good from the bad in Champions of Norrath, but most of it isn't good nor bad, just kinda outdated. If you would like to skip my thoughts and just hear a summary of my review, click on the time on the screen. For everyone else, here are some things I liked and some things I did not like about Champions of Norrath. To start, I'm still unsure if I like Dark Alliance better than Champions of Norrath. All things considered, if I hadn't made a mistake right off the bat and chose the mage, I think I would have liked Champions better. If there is a single thing that Champions does perfectly, it's kick things off. One of my complaints about Dark Alliance was the limited class choice. You could choose between the generic white dude, the hot elf, or the dwarf. I chose the hot elf, the mage, because magic. Lucky for me, that paid off as the mage was slow to start, but became fairly powerful in the mid to late game. I was thinking I would take a different route this time, but unfortunately my weakness got the better of me. I love this character select screen. The champions gather and are told their mission. Then you choose a class, gender, skin, and hairstyle. We spent a decent amount of time here just perusing the different classes and looks. Most of the classes seemed pretty interesting. I nearly went with the barbarian, which looking back was the absolute correct choice. But again, my high intellect and immense charisma told me to pick her. I played co-op with my son and he chose the dark elf, which is probably one of the coolest looking classes in the game. After choosing your champion, the game seamlessly moves you right into gameplay. This is a fantastic way to start off your adventure. Now, I will say that Baldur's Gate starts off just as strong, but the amount of choice up front is laughable compared to Champions. Another comparison that was laughable was how much work the devs of Champions put into the equipment and weapons of the game. Dark Alliance fell apart completely in this aspect. If you watch that review, you'll remember that I purposely wore weaker armor, just to keep my son and I from getting our characters confused. In Champions, that is never an issue. Not only are your characters' shapes unique, but each class has lovingly crafted armor types that makes your champion stand out in battle. The mage that I chose had some of the wildest outfits with all kinds of colors and cuts. I really appreciated that. The weapons also stand out. My son rotated through axes, swords, halberds, and greatswords before our playthrough was done. I unfortunately got to use clubs and, more clubs. Yeah, the mage was very lame. Now, putting that aside for now, Champions unfortunately shares a similar issue with Dark Alliance that made the playthrough infuriating. Before I start into this rant, I do need to mention something. After playing both this and Dark Alliance, I've realized that the games are obviously built upon the idea of multiple playthroughs. Champions more than Alliance. As I played, it became apparent that the devs wanted players to be able to feel a sense of progression through not just their first playthrough, but multiple ones as well. I have some strong opinions on New Game Plus. I like the idea, but I hate when it's considered a main feature of the game. I enjoy a single playthrough of a title and rarely go back for a second. I have to really like the game for that to happen. And even then, I will usually choose to do a fresh playthrough. Finishing Champions and realizing that the higher spells and better equipment of the game were made exclusively for a second, possibly a third playthrough, was just irritating. But that would have been fine if the game had at least given me equipment worth using throughout my first playthrough. But it didn't. After our 20-hour playthrough, there was a single boss that dropped a single piece of equipment useful for my current level. Everything else was multiple levels higher than where I was. And of all those, most I wouldn't have been able to use in the final boss considering what level I was when I beat it. This is unforgivable. I'm not sure how many bosses we fought, but to have only a single armor set drop was just... Why? Why be this stingy with loot drops? I mean, it's not like they weren't willing to throw hundreds of shitty swords, helmets, armor, and shields at the player. Why was the percentage of useful equipment so low? Dark Alliance had this same issue, which makes me think that it's a feature, not a bug. And similar to Dark Alliance, leveling and skills were just as stingy as the equipment. We finished the game at around level 17, which means that in our 20-ish hour playthrough, we leveled less than 1 level per hour. Now that would be disappointing if leveling meant something, but it barely does. You get to attribute stats that improve things like health and mana regeneration, physical attack damage, and accuracy. Then you get to the skill tree. The skill trees of champions are much more robust than Dark Alliance, but because of the aforementioned multiple playthrough perspective of this title, you hardly get to explore anything. For example, my son chose the Dark Elf. This is a hybrid physical magical class with 3 different paths on the tree. We tried to explore the magic route slightly, but seeing the pace of which we leveled, my son decided to not chance having a worthless jack of all trades and put everything into physical damage. It would have been fun to mess around with the branches, but the ability points were so sparse that, at least for the first playthrough, you really had to pick a lane and stick to it. Now, if you chose a good starting class, then picking a lane can work. But if you happen to be tempted by a large pair of rib cushions and an alluring smile, well, you're kind of boned. As I was saying, the mage's personality drew me in, and I thought, well, the mage in Dark Alliance worked out well. Sure, in the early to mid game she sucked, but as soon as I broke into the late game skill tree, she became immensely broken. Was that the case for the mage? Absolutely not. Champion's mage was a complete joke. First of all, my magic damage was garbage. Second of all, I would often run out of MP, meaning that for the most part I focused on physical damage, which despite my low strength stat, ended up having the highest damage potential. I poured nearly all my SP into mana regeneration, seeing as it throttled my battle potential, but it barely made a difference. Now with all that being said, there was a light at the end of the tunnel, a goal that I worked towards, a hope birthed from my experience with Dark Alliance. The mage's skill tree begs you to get to the fire spells at the very bottom. I thought, here we go, these are going to be busted. I couldn't wait to finally see my damage numbers go up. As I entered the end game, I was finally able to unlock them and... Oh. So not only does my son match my fire spell damage easily with his regular attack, but it drains a quarter of my MP, meaning that I could only fire off 4 shots before needing to either use a mana potion or switch to physical combat with my, club. To add insult to injury, all the enemies in the final dungeon are immune to fire damage. I mean, what is that? If I hadn't had my son there and I was playing solo, I'm not sure I could have beaten this dungeon with the mage. How does one make a decision like this? The endgame spells for the mage are fire, and the endgame enemies are fire immune. So yeah, I seem to have chose one of the worst classes in the game, which tainted my experience. And the experience I had was okay. It wasn't all bad. There were a lot of good things, including the plot. Champions is about twice the length of Baldur's Gate, but carries all of the same traits, both good and bad. I think Dark Alliance overall had the most memorable narrative, but Champions certainly had the better plot. At a certain point, your hero must travel through the mansion of a vampire lord. His mistress, this bodacious vixen, ends up teaming with you to stop her lover. I don't remember much about this section other than mega tits here and that there were vampires. Oh, and their accents are magnificent.
You should be honored, Overlander. You are the first in a century to stand defiant in the presence of the Lord of Vampires.
There's this other part of the story where you are shipwrecked on an island. You end up meeting this bodacious mermaid who gives you a shell that lets you breathe underwater. I don't remember much about this section other than Ariel's sister's, headband. There's also some bodacious chick who keeps appearing to the player in ghost form. She spills out exposition, and I think she's a reoccurring character in the EverQuest series if I'm not mistaken. Eventually you free her, and she helps you defeat the final boss. I don't remember her name or what she is, some kind of goddess, but she has a nice shirt. Also, this is her helper.
Did you want to look around again?
Yes, ma'am. Sir. Boss. Poobah.
Yeah, Champion's plot was great. I don't remember much about the story though. Something to do with the horn. I have sequels to both games coming up in the challenge, so I'd like to go over what I think can be improved here. The first thing that needs to change is more rewarding leveling. Skill trees need to mean something. Leveling needs to feel like an upgrade in power. I want my characters to start off feeling weak and basic, and through experimentation and leveling, end as a god. The second most important change is the loot drops. I'm okay with getting useless equipment every once in a while, especially when you can sell it to buy more useful equipment. But I found that in both games, it was rare, if not impossible, to find something lying on the ground better than what you bought at the shops. That needs to change. Borderlands does loot drops right. Each piece of equipment is color-coded with its rarity. This helps the player decide if they even want to bother picking it up. While playing Borderlands, I never felt like loot was worthless and would often switch out my guns. There's no reason why the sequels to Champions and Dark Alliance can't do this. Add in rare drops and let the players see that rarity, and I think you've fixed the issue. My final thought on improving the series is synergy between classes. I think that a multiplayer game like this should consider how a mage and a dark elf, or an archer and a cleric, or two barbarians could work together. Maybe throw in some support skills or buffs like a yell that the barbarian uses to increase his party's attack power, or a healing spell, or a shield spell, or a haste spell. Really anything. 99% of the time, my son and I felt like we were playing a co-op game alone. Interaction between our characters was minimal, and which class we chose really made no difference to us. Here's hoping that we see some of these changes in the sequels. Champions of Norrath is a relic of the PS2 era. Comparing this to modern-day isometric action games will show that gaming has long since left standard titles like this in the dust. With that being said, it isn't completely unworthy of a playthrough. The opportunity to play couch co-op with some friends, some intriguing plot, and an absolute banger of a start lend this dinosaur some street cred. At least a little. If you have to choose between this and Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance, go with Champions of Norrath. But do not pick the mage, no matter what she says to you. And that's my review. Thank you to all my Patreon members for their support. If you want to support me on this journey, click on the link in the description and join the Pro tier for only $5 a month. I have exclusive content and other perks waiting for you. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you all later.